Fox News alert. We are just hours away from President Biden unveiling the next steps in his vaccine push as he now weighs a mandate regarding federal workers. All this comes amid growing questions about the science behind the CDC's new mask guidance. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno, and here today, Fox News correspondent Julie Banderas, host of Kennedy on Fox Business Kennedy, former State Department spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus, and in the center virtual seat, editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, host of the Ben Shapiro Show, Ben Shapiro. And Morgan, Ben also brought up sort of a power grab, essentially, by the Democrats. Let's play a short video of what Senator Ted Cruz had to say about that. Watch.
It's pure politics. You know what? Yesterday, vaccines worked. Today, they still work, but as a political matter, the Democrats decided they want to control your lives. My view is real simple. We shouldn't have federal government mandates on COVID.
Morgan.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the Wall Street Journal, in their editorial, I think laid it out perfectly this morning, obviously against federal mandates, but talking about the fact that private employers do have a right to make those decisions and demand certain things of their workforce. So I think it's really nuanced. But what is really important in this whole discussion is we took all of last year to politicize COVID. And what should have happened is somebody who was in the Trump administration, I volunteered over the summer working on Operation Warp Speed and on the COVID effort. I've got to tell you, every senior person that I know in the administration, Kayleigh has talked about that, received the vaccine because we were all a part of Operation Warp Speed. And we knew that President Trump and his team made heroic efforts to get this vaccine out. But what has happened is that the Democrats used most of 2020 to politicize COVID, to politicize the vaccine in order to sow seeds of distrust. And now you have 2021 where people are not believing each side, and where President Biden is spending more time going on and talking about voting rights and infrastructure legislation, as opposed to saying, you know what? President Trump did something right with Operation Warp Speed. Now let's all come together and take this vaccine and do what we can do to end this pandemic. But instead, they just continue to talk down to people who haven't gotten the vaccine, and they continue to politicize this process to the detriment of the American people.
Critics slamming Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, accusing the squad member of judging legislation by the color of its supporters after she reacted to the picture of the bipartisan group of senators behind the infrastructure bill, tweeting, "A lot of times bipartisan agreements are just as defined by who people in power agree to exclude than include," end quote. That leading Mark Hemingway, a senior writer at Real Clear Investigation, to tweet, "This from AOC, by the way, is not an argument. It is pure ad hominem that says nothing about the bill or its merits. A healthy culture would repudiate her for judging legislation solely by the skin color of the people supporting it." And, you know, there's a lot of work to be done, Morgan. There's a lot of work to be done, not only on infrastructure, but certainly on immigration and the border crisis. But when you are making every issue about race, you sort of don't have to focus on the legislation at all, do you?
Well, from a political perspective, this just makes no sense. If this bill is passed, if it's signed by the president, it would be a very big win for a Democratic president who, that's in their party. So I don't even understand from a political perspective why they're attacking a piece of bipartisan legislation that would, if enacted, be a big win for their party. Maybe perhaps it's because they're not getting their way as it relates to the Green New Deal legislation that they wanted included in the infrastructure bill, because of course it looks like a lot of that's being stripped out in the bipartisan talks. So I think that they're just pouting, maybe.
I will be sending an additional $11 million supplemental budget request to the council this week to allow for the hiring of 20 new officers in FY21 and 150 new officers in FY22.
Over a year after the D.C. City Council voted to defund the police force by $15 million, Mayor Muriel Bowser is now calling for a major investment in police recruitment efforts amid a surge in violent crime. Homicides in the nation's capital hit a 16-year high last year, and so far 2021 is on track to surpass that. While Mayor Bowser was opposed to defunding the police, she has been a vocal supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement, which are themselves advocates for defunding the police. Now, it's not just her. The Democratic mayors of Seattle, Roanoke, Minneapolis, Dallas, and Portland are all calling for more police officers as they face critical staffing and crime spike issues also. All right, Morgan, I'll start with you on this. What a difference a year makes, but I'm curious who they think they're going to hire when police officers are retiring and leaving in droves. Who would want to join a police force in this current climate?
Well, especially I think when you have so many children that used to look up to, to cops. I still hope they do, and to police. You would bring, your dad or your mom in to show and tell, to show what the parents, have grown up to be. And it was something that we admired. I think it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, whenever this really started to heat up. It was in the Obama administration, and I remember vividly talking about this on Mornings with Maria. And at the time, I said, the left is about to do to cops in this country what they did to members of the military during Vietnam. And I'm really, really sorry to say that we've seen that happen. And instead of having mature, reasonable conversations about things like criminal justice reform, that was bipartisan legislation that happened in the Trump administration. The left could be talking about how can we pursue more criminal justice reform? How can we add on to that? But instead, it's been pithy slogans combined with dangerous cuts, as you pointed out, $15 million that Muriel Bowser cuts from D.C.'s budget. And now what do we have in D.C.? I had a friend that had a domestic violence situation over the weekend. He was trying to assist another friend, went to a D.C. police precinct. There was no one at the front desk for them to even report the crime. This is the kind of stuff that people are facing in cities around the country, and this rhetoric is now dangerous for citizens and especially for victims.
Where in this plan does Kamala Harris have laid out to, let's say, not release 50,000 migrants into the public after detaining them?
And she's got these ticky-tack specifics that don't really say anything. And that is emblematic for her leadership. Like, she's not really saying anything, but she's kind of looking busy by putting a list together like this. But one of the most important things that is missing, the glaring omission from her list, is the war on drugs. And that is the root cause that has created the environment for corruption and instability and grifting and all of the other elements that make people want to leave because they can no longer seek justice or employment in their home countries. But she doesn't want to talk about that, oddly enough.
Morgan, during your time at the White House, the war on drugs was obviously a huge incentive for people to want to come into this country in the first place. So if Kamala Harris's role was to find the root of the problem, well, there is the root. Why isn't she talking about it?
Well, if you look at the plan that she released, there's really not a lot you could argue with in there, right? As Kennedy just pointed out, there's a lot of platitudes and things that people can agree on, like human rights. Okay. So when you look actually as vice president in the last year, I think it was the last year of the Obama administration, President Biden actually released his plan for these Northern Triangle countries as well. It was very similar, right, about addressing the root causes. And that's why there's a whole longer discussion that you could have on foreign aid that we had in the Trump administration at USAID with Mark Green on getting these countries to be more self-reliant. But listen, there's two things that I think that we should watch carefully in this whole debate. One is Title 32. That's a public health order. I talked about that a few months ago on this show. The Biden administration was expected to rescind that, and they're actually keeping it in place because, as you pointed out, that there's just so many migrants coming across the border with COVID. And then secondly, expedited removal. The White House is talking about how they're putting this in place. Well, this is already an existing law. So someone, maybe Peter Doocy, needs to ask the White House, why haven't you been implementing expedited removal for the past 6 months? It's already in law. You're not doing anything new here.
It's interesting that they mention human rights. Is that going to include the children migrants that are locked up and not wearing masks and spreading COVID to border security officials and employees? I doubt not.
This day, 30 years ago, Nelson Mandela walked out of prison. I had the great honor of meeting him. I had the great honor of being arrested with our UN ambassador on the streets of Soweto trying to get to see him on Robbins Island. When he came to the United States, and I said, Mr. President, he leaned, I said, thank you. Thank you for trying to come and see me.
And a guy named Angelo Negri came up and he goes, Joey, baby,
grabs my cheek like that. And I thought they were going to shoot him. I really did. I said, no. Corn Pop was a bad dude. And he ran a bunch of bad boys. And so he was up on the board, wouldn't listen to me. I said, hey, Esther, you, off the board, or I'll come up and drag you off. And he said, I'll be waiting for you. He was waiting for 3 guys in straight razors.
I mean, wow. Morgan, when you do story time at night before, yeah. your baby's bedtime, it's fun, right? Like sometimes we read out of a book, sometimes we improv, sometimes my 8-year-old daughter, I'll just give her a couple topics and she makes stuff up before bed. This string of sound bites were like amazing bedtime stories. I'm actually going to use them tonight.
You know, Julie, I think you're being mean to the president. I think it's quite possible that Corn Pop actually taught him how to drive the 18-wheeler. Right?
Oh,
Maybe
okay. So he was never actually a lifeguard, but he was an 18-wheeler in Corn Pop in Delaware.
You never know. Corn Pop might also be an 18-wheeler
I didn't put those two
driver
together, but see, there's that interesting creative storytelling that I apparently do not possess.